Well, Dmitri Alperovitch is a geopolitical analyst who focuses on Russia and China. He is also the author of the book World on the Brink: How America Can Beat China in the Race for the 21st Century. And Dmitri joins me tonight right here. Dmitri, it's good to have you with us. The two leaders here say that they enjoy a no-limits partnership. So let me just ask you, what are the real limits here?
Well, the limits are actually huge. Neither countries are actually allies of each other. They're at most friends of convenience. And certainly from China's perspective, this is a very transactional relationship. China is looking to buy fossil fuels from Russia, oil, gas, and coal at a significant discount to help its own economy. But in terms of exports to Russia, Russia is actually a tiny market for China. It is the 16th overall in terms of exports for them, and is not at all strategic. And even when it comes to fossil fuels, one of the top priorities for Putin as he embarks on this trip is going to be to sign the deal on the Power of Siberia to gas pipeline, to redirect the gas that was originally destined to go to Europe, to China. The Chinese have been dragging their feet on this and negotiating a very hard bargain on price that makes it not a very attractive deal for Russia.
I want to talk about weapons for a moment here. Putin, we know, clearly needs China's backing for his war in Ukraine, but he's only getting weapons or aid from Iran and North Korea. Do you think that's going to change anytime soon?
I don't. So look, China is perfectly willing to sell anything that Putin is going to buy as long as it does not result in sanctions from the United States. So it is clearly afraid of jeopardizing the U.S. relationship any further, and the European one as well. So when it comes to lethal weapons, it is not going to budge on that because it knows that it cannot afford right now, particularly when its economy is not doing well, to come under these sanctions. Now, dual-use equipment, it's certainly going to continue sending that, whether it's semiconductors, whether it's machines to manufacture advanced weapon systems. That is going to be delivered through black market means through resellers in China.
Xi Jinping last week was in France when Vladimir Putin shook his nuclear rattle, if you will, by announcing tactical nuclear weapons drills with Belarus. I mean, how does toying with the nuclear threat, how does that go down with Xi Jinping?
Not well. And in fact, Xi Jinping has been critical when Putin last tried to use the nuclear blackmail card in the fall of 2022 when his forces were surrounded in the city of Kherson, and there was fear on the U.S. side that he might actually either test a nuclear weapon or threaten to use a nuclear weapon on the battlefield in Ukraine. They approached China as well as other leaders to send a clear message to Putin that this is unacceptable, and China did so. China does not want to see the breaking of the taboo in the use of nuclear weapons because they themselves would be impacted by this in a potential conflict with the U.S. over Taiwan, for example.
I'm wondering, Dmitri, where does Russia fit in with China's confrontation with the West, particularly with the United States? I mean, a valuable ally, or is it more of a useful distraction? We know U.S. foreign policy assets, they've been tied up dealing with Ukraine. We know that the Biden administration wanted to focus on China.
It did. And, this is sort of a trend line in American foreign policy over the last decade that we try to pivot to Asia, and every single time something else, whether it's the Middle East or Europe, tends to intervene and pull us back. And look, I think for China, this war is not something I think they desired originally, but they've learned not to just live with it, but actually benefit from it. They're getting cheap gas and oil from Russia. They're increasingly, Russia is becoming economically dependent on China and becoming a vassal state to China. And America is distracted. It is sending weapons and munitions that it might need in a conflict in Asia to Ukraine. It's spending so much of its resources diplomatically and economically on this conflict. So that is all highly beneficial to China.
So let's consider then when the United States does focus more on China. In an article that you published today in Foreign Affairs, you argue the Taiwan situation has relevant similarities with the Cold War situation of West Berlin. How should Washington go back to the old Moscow playbook when it's dealing with Beijing?
Well, the key to understanding the Cold War and the importance of West Berlin is that when the Berlin Wall was built in 1961, it actually lowered the tensions dramatically in the Cold War because Berlin, West Berlin, was the one flashpoint that threatened to take the U.S. and the Soviet Union into nuclear conflict. Obviously, there was Cuba as well for 13 days. There was actually an outgrowth of the West Berlin crisis in 1962. But pretty much after 1962, the threat of conflict diminished dramatically. And you had a detente in the 1970s, improvements in relations, arms control agreements, and the like. You could have the same thing between the United States and China, but you have to convince China that taking Taiwan is untenable, that it will not happen. And just like Khrushchev decided to abandon his ambitions to take West Berlin, China has to abandon its ambitions on Taiwan in order to see improved relations.
Yeah, you write that ultimately there can be no détente with China without the creation of a figurative wall across the Taiwan Strait. What would that look like?
So it's all about deterrence. We have to convince President Xi that taking Taiwan is impossible militarily, and even if he thinks it might not be impossible militarily, that the economic cost would be disastrous. So it means investing in significant deterrence capabilities, military deterrence capabilities in the region with the Taiwanese, but it also means increasing our economic leverage over China in areas like semiconductors, for example, artificial intelligence, and reducing their economic leverage over us in the areas of green technologies like electric vehicles, like batteries, which we've just seen the Biden administration has placed tariffs on.
You say just as it was in the Cold War for the United States, stalling can be a winning strategy when we're talking about China. You say slowing China's advance down a month here or a year there is critical. And you say, as is letting China make its own mistakes. What would be the biggest mistake, in your opinion, that China could make moving forward?
It's really economic. They're mismanaging their economy. They have a huge real estate bubble. Their youth unemployment is over 15%. President Xi seems completely uninterested in fixing those fundamental economic issues. And on top of that, he has a demographic collapse that's going to manifest itself in the coming decades. China is doing nothing about all of those problems. And as long as that continues, their economy will always be smaller than the United States, which means less money to spend on projects like the Belt and Road initiatives and on their military.
Dmitri Alperovitch, we appreciate your time and valuable analysis tonight. Thank you.
Thanks so much.